This afternoon. I would just like to inform you that as well as the participants in this room, we have approximately 150 online participants. So we're going to try and start promptly. I just have one request for those of you who's just joined us in the room. Our speakers are situated here, and we just want to ask this section of the audience, would you mind just moving a little bit down so the speakers can talk a little bit more intimately and directly at you? We would really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Sorry, the setup of the room is not very intimate, but we hope to create a bit more of a conversational feel. Thank you. I just want to ask the technicians if they're ready to open the Zoom call. Great. Then, Mark, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Transparency Matters seminar here in this wonderful building of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium. And thank you to our sponsors, both the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the European Commission. It's my job to moderate this session. I'm Mark Robinson, the Executive Director of the EITI. We have a great panel of speakers who I'll introduce shortly, but actually I'm going to hand over first to our initial keynote speaker from the Commission, Mr. Antti Karhunen, who will introduce himself and the context for this event. Thank you, Antti.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, colleagues, and friends, and welcome to Brussels on behalf of the European Commission for these very important gatherings in these days on around the EITI. I would first like to express our very warm thanks to our co-host, the Belgian government, for having the chance to be here, gather here in the nice premises of the Palais d'Egmont. That's really very much appreciated indeed. And I have the honor of opening this session on critical raw materials in times of uncertainty, why good governance matters for energy security. Mark will be moderating, and we have a very distinguished panel. I think Mark will introduce after some introductory remark from my side. We will also have, hopefully, some representatives from our own EU delegations in the field who are expected to join this session. Before handing over to the panel and to Mark to moderate, let me just perhaps highlight a few key aspects on how the European Commission sees this challenging field, and also perhaps highlight a few key initiatives that are recent. So starting by stressing that the sustainable supply of raw materials is really essential, and that for several reasons. First, it really supports the implementation of Agenda 2030, achievement of the SDGs. Secondly, it enables the development of technologies that are necessary to achieve our climate neutrality targets by 2050. And thirdly, and a bit from the EU policy perspective, it's critically important for the implementation of the EU's Green Deal and the digital transition objectives. Finally, it does feed the innovation required for the economic recovery from COVID. even more imperative today in front of the challenges that we are facing for diversifying energy and other supply chains in the current difficult geopolitical context, exacerbated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and in view of the inflationary pressures and the rather opaque and difficult outlook of the world economy. Now, some of the critical raw materials are in very high demand for their strategic application, and some of them support the transition of lowering carbon use and, for example, improving the energy storage through batteries. So in particular, this is the case for critical raw materials like cobalt or lithium, nickel, tantalum, tungsten, that are all necessary for the green technological transition, whether to support renewable energy production or for the energy conversion for green hydrogen, for example. We have just experienced also an unprecedented price volatility in this area. For example, the nickel price for metric ton has increased from 20,000 USD at the beginning of the year to 30,000 USD, with a combined need to support the diversification. And many of these raw materials, cobalt and lithium to be named as examples, are also sourced artisanally. That is about 30 or 40% of the overall quantity of these. And their extractive processes often lack the necessary compliance with responsible mining practices, both in terms of labor and environmental standards. And the increased demand, if not properly channeled, could be detrimental to their sustainable supply. This would then often result and can result in environmental damage, and if there is no rehabilitation of the mining sites, hazardous waste is often also left abandoned. Further, if this is linked to the issues of lack of occupational health and safety measures in artisanal and small-scale mining, this often poses then health risks that can even be, in the worst case, fatal. So issues linked to children miners, which is one of the worst forms of child labor, are, I think, a case in point. The EU supports sustainable development of raw materials sector in line with the objectives of our Commission communication on critical raw materials resilience from 2020. In line with that, the Commission regularly reviews, that is every 3 years or so, the list of critical raw materials that are most important economically, in particular for EU's ambition to deliver on the Green Deal. Just to mention, among these 30 CRMs that we have listed, cobalt, magnesium, graphite, lithium, heavy and rare earth elements are there. So the developmental value of these minerals also explains why the European Commission works in very close partnerships, not only with the EU member states, but with many international organizations. I'd like to highlight, the key partners that we have: the OECD, the World Bank, the UNDP, the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, the OSCPS, and of course, and least but not least importantly, the very important partnership with the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the EITI. So from our point of view, the increased market demand for critical raw materials does not mean that there shall be any kind of leniency on the sustainability requirements in their extraction and production. Quite on the opposite. In fact, we are currently in the middle of a steady evolution, moving towards mandatory corporate sustainability due diligence, which would cover all sectors and those beyond the 3 Ts, the tin, tungsten, and tantalum, and gold, which are already covered by existing conflict minerals regulation that is in force since 2021. So, in fact, in future, and once adopted, the new Commission's proposal on corporate sustainable due diligence directive will set out the rules for companies to respect human rights and environment in global value chains, aiming to cover the entire supply chain. The 2019 EITI standards requirements already ask implementing countries to disclose information on the management and monitoring of environmental impact of the extractive industries. And the extractive companies must report about their social and environmental expenditure. This, we hope, should, for its part, already help in ensuring then, a swift implementation of the future EU requirements when these will be adopted. I would finally just want to say that EU is also very actively engaged with some of our partner countries to establish strategic partnerships. This in view of supporting sustainable raw materials supply chains. And through such partnerships, we can promote sustainable investments that we believe will create win-win opportunities for the EU and for the countries in question, resource-rich countries, in the form of sustainable growth and jobs. And I think that is what we all would like to see. I am now very pleased to hand over to Mark and to our very distinguished panel, and I hope we can also hear from you, how you see the EU's role in further shaping the path towards sustainable development, raw materials supply chain. Thank you very much, and again, welcome to this very exciting event. And Mark, I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Antti, for those opening remarks. And for those who don't know Antti, he's the Director of Sustainable Finance, Investment and Jobs, Economy that Works for the People in INTPA of the European Commission. Just to take a step back, why are we here and what's the subject we're discussing? So we've badged this event, Critical Raw Materials in Times of Uncertainty, Why Good Governance Matters for Energy Security. And in the hour or so we have remaining, we're going to explore the importance of critical minerals for the energy transition and energy security, in particular, the extent to which transparency and good government are essential to addressing supply risks. Just a couple of housekeeping points. There is interpretation available on your screens. You push the button saying floor, and there's a number of languages, so use your headphones if you need a different language from English. We have a large number of people here in the room at the Egmont Palace, 100 or so, but another 150 online. So we're also keen to engage you and to take your questions for the panel. I'm obliged to tell you there are 4 fire exits at each corner of this large room, should the need arise. To the panel itself, we have, as Antti said, a really distinguished and engaged panel who I'll briefly introduce. On my right, Francis Biaggi Algali, Minister of State from the Office of the Vice President of the Republic of Sierra Leone and an EITI Board member. Also an EITI Board member on her right, Laurence de Chambenois, Global Head of External Affairs at Rio Tinto. On my far left over here, Sampe Purba, who's Natural Resource Economics Advisor to the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Indonesia. And finally, just here to my left, Erika Westenberg, yet another board member, Governance Programs Director, the Natural Resource Governance Institute. Sampe serves on the board too, representing the Asia region. So we've got a lot of talent on our board who've got a lot to share with you. Now, just to put the context around our conversation today, for nearly 20 years, the EITI has been leading the way in promoting good governance in oil, gas, and mining. And many of you know we do this principally by requiring the disclosure of information on revenue flows, contracts, beneficial ownership, and through multi-stakeholder dialogue involving governments, civil society, and industry. We now have 56 countries implementing the EITI standard around the world and from all regions of the world. And many of our stakeholders are gathered here in Brussels and for this board meeting over the next 2 days. So this really kicks off our substantive discussions. In the last couple of years, the EITI has been considering what is the contribution that we make to the energy transition? What is the value that we add? And essentially, as the shift to a low-carbon economy gathers pace, it's having a transformative impact on the extractive industries and the global economy. And we find, as we've heard from a number of our stakeholders, that our work is potentially more important than ever to provide data, information, and promote public dialogue on these issues. And in particular, a critical aspect for our attention today is about demand for minerals used in low-carbon technologies and what this means for energy, for mining sector governance. And in a recent policy brief that I think a number of you will have seen now and is available outside and on our website, we set out a range of challenges that growing minerals demand could pose for environmental, social, and governance outcomes in the mining sector, highlighting risks related to revenue volatility, corruption, environmental and social impacts, as well as state participation. And it describes the role that the EITI can play in helping to overcome these challenges. And we argue that without good governance, growing minerals demand could cause harm in mineral-producing countries. We believe mineral sector governance is critical for importing countries, including within the EU. A good governance can ensure a reliable and sustainable supply of minerals for low-carbon technologies. And without these minerals, efforts to strengthen energy security in a way that is consistent with climate change objectives could be at risk. As Antti explained, the EU has set up a bilateral partnerships on sustainable raw material value chains with Canada and Ukraine, and currently exploring such partnerships with several African countries. These partnerships aim to support the development of local value chains and sustainable investment. We hope to showcase the role of such partnerships and other international standards in reducing governance and corruption risks along the mineral supply chain. Finally, we hope to bring in perspectives from producing countries, civil society and the private sector, showcasing how disclosures and multi-stakeholder dialogue are of strategic importance. Today's event, we have a panel discussion followed by Q&A. I hope we may fit in 2 rounds of contributions from the panel, depending on how the time goes. So the first question is for Lawrence. What role does the minerals sector play in ensuring energy security and advancing the energy transition?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of those who have come here today to listen to this important debate. I mean, the mineral sector, together with industry and host nations, plays a central role in advancing energy security today. Many of the metals and minerals that we produce are necessary for the technologies that will underpin the movement of the world towards energy security, and also to the technologies that will essentially help us to combat the climate crisis. In the past couple of months, one of the things that we've seen is a significant shift in the conversation that we're having with policymakers. As you can imagine, with the COVID crisis, followed on by the crisis in Ukraine, there are a lot of concerns at the policy level and at the national levels around energy security. Many countries are unveiling critical minerals lists. Many countries are unveiling policies that will allow them to ensure that they have strategic autonomy, using the term that is used here in the European Union. That debate has shifted now, and this is quite recent. In the past 2 months, that debate has shifted to a broader debate within our industry, and also a debate that we're having with our customers and our suppliers. In order for us to achieve our climate targets, in order for the European Union to achieve the targets it has established for itself in the Green Deal, in order for Rio Tinto to achieve its own targets with regard to the reduction of carbon emissions, we're going to have to really produce much more metals and minerals than we produced in the past, different types of metals and minerals than the ones that we produced in the past. A recent report by the World Bank actually stated that we'd probably need about 3 billion tons of new metals and minerals over the next coming years in order to reach these ambitions that we have for ourselves in the world. Most of the technologies that we will use to tackle the climate crisis, be it wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles, are essentially made up of metals and minerals. At the same time, I think while we're having this debate in the developing world, in the developed world, we shouldn't forget also about the impact that this new gold rush for minerals should have in the developing world. I think the key is to avoid that we, in 10, 15 years, we talk about another resource curse. And I think with regard to that, all of us around the table, including the EITI, has a significant role to play, ensuring transparency, but also ensuring that the countries where we mine these minerals are equipped to use those minerals and to have a positive economic impact for their populations. Second thing of concern for us, and again, is that these minerals and metals are essentially concentrated in certain parts of the world. They are also in parts of the world where mining has not taken place for a very long time. And that requires us, mining companies, policymakers, governments, the populations, to essentially establish a new form of social compact that takes into account the need for mining to take place in Europe, in North America, and not just in the developing world. And that means that we're going to have to find new ways of mining, that we're going to have to mine more sustainably, paying attention to the environment, paying a different level of attention to the concerns of stakeholders and those we will be mining around. I think those, for me, are some of the challenges that we face and some of the concerns that we have as an industry, but also highlights the role that we need to play in ensuring that we mine differently, we mine more sustainably, but also ensuring that we are able to mine in places that are keen to achieve their strategic autonomy goals. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. Very striking to hear that phrase, the importance of averting a risk of a second resource curse. I think that's a very apt way of thinking through some of the challenges, but also some of the ways that those can be mitigated. My next question is to Sampe Purba. Sampe, as one of the world's major producers of nickel, with major reserves of several other minerals in your country, what opportunities and challenges does Indonesia face in developing its critical minerals sector?
Thank you, Mark. I think that's a very good question. Ladies and gentlemen, currently Indonesia has mineral resources, indeed, and reserves. We do have nickel, bauxite, copper, iron, manganese, lead, and zinc. According to World Energy Outlook Special Report 2020, that you can find on web, we will see that share of extraction of nickel in Indonesia is quite major. Unfortunately, only less than half of it being processed domestically. Going to that, number two, as a producing country that willing also to optimize the economic added value to the local communities and to the whole state, Indonesia would like to leverage our economic growth by promoting processing and smeltering domestically. Such policy transformation is mandated in the spirit of our law and mineral and coal mining. We do keep the governance in place by applying good mining standards in both integrated smelting or a standalone one, with respect to the environment, with respect to the local people, and everything else there. In this sense, we likely to expect the collaboration to all of you, the prominent and serious partners are welcome to our country for technology provider and transfers, financing, and other framework that mutually provide benefit to all parties. So we will see that we will not talk only about supply chain in future, but we talk about the value chain. Value chain is not only the supply side, also the demand side, the market side, technical side, and everything else. In such a way, we really believe this will be beneficial not only to Indonesia, but also to all of us as part of our global transition to a better energy and cleaner energy. I think that's my response to that. Mark, thank you.
Thanks so much, Pak Sampai. And very striking, this emphasis on demand side as much as supply side. And as you say, looking at the value chains and the benefits these bring to producer countries. And I know that Indonesia holds the G20 presidency until the end of this year, and that you are playing a leading role in giving attention to these issues. If I might now turn to Francis Agali. And Francis, how might a growing demand globally for minerals impact Sierra Leone? And what are the risks and opportunities you see for mining sector governance?
Thank you, Mark, for bringing me into this conversation. I will choose my words carefully. The growing global demand for minerals has the potential to present important economic opportunities for a country like Sierra Leone. It has the potential for increased revenue generation. It has the potential to bring infrastructure development. It has the potential to improve employment. It has the potential for poverty reduction. Currently, the mining sector in Sierra Leone contributes about 30% of the gross domestic product and employs a huge number of people in the sector. The government of Sierra Leone also recently conducted an airborne geophysical survey to identify locations, quantities, and types of minerals. So this has given the government an opportunity to negotiate from a position of strength. The release of the geophysical survey report is expected to attract a lot of investors in the mining sector in the country. So in general, mining investment could mean more jobs, more disposable government revenues, more procurement opportunities. However, past mining booms provide a cautionary tale. Sierra Leone has been mining diamonds since the Second World War. We have the largest mineral rutile mine in the country, iron ore, etc. So there are risks involved in these booms. First of all, price fluctuations and volatility in the markets might have difficulties for us as a government to project incomes that is expected from this mineral boom. And we saw that in 2012 during the iron ore boom and when the iron ore prices fell. Also, critical minerals, the demand for it, could also heighten the risk of corruption, which is a very critical issue. And the business opportunities associated with the investment boom might lend the country vulnerable to corruption, weaker governance structures, etc. Thirdly, the high mining prices could push mining into more environmental and more socially sensitive areas, which might run the country into a risk. And fourthly, it would lead to more state involvement in the extractive industry, and that in itself has its own attendant problems when the state becomes more involved into the extractive industry. So these are some of the risks, but like I said, there are more opportunities than risk. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Francis. Very striking from Sierra Leone how much you are learning from past experience for future benefit, and very much as a country that has so much resource potential in the future and been ready for that. If I could now turn to Erica and ask this question. What are the potential implications of these risks for energy security in importing countries and to address global climate change efforts?
Thanks, Mark. I think all the issues that the panelists have mentioned are important, but we are particularly concerned about corruption risks, and that's because the negative impacts of corruption are just so cross-cutting. Corruption reduces appetite for investment. It puts transition mineral supply chains at risk, which means climate targets themselves are at greater risk. And it robs citizens in mineral-producing countries of the development potential that they deserve, the development we need to achieve an energy transition that's truly just and equitable. So the link we're trying to drive home is that addressing corruption in critical minerals is fundamentally material to making climate progress. To your question, Mark, on energy security implications, I think the message here is that improving energy security in producer countries, improving energy security in importing countries shouldn't come at the cost of potentially harming human security in producer countries. And we know commodity booms can exacerbate risks, as Francis said, including corruption risks. So we have to find a way of balancing urgent energy security and climate considerations alongside long-standing development, equity, and anti-corruption goals. And if we do it right, I think these factors can actually reinforce each other rather than pulling in opposite directions. And I think that's what we're all working towards. To support that, we are trying to really build momentum around concrete solutions to tackle corruption risks. So yesterday and today, the OECD, EITI, and NRGI have been convening an expert working group on reducing corruption in critical mineral supply chains. And this is only the second gathering of this group. It's an ongoing effort, but with huge thanks to the experts who've been participating over the past few days and my colleagues and our partners. I do want to quickly highlight two operational moments and two accountability mechanisms that I feel like have really been emerging as front runners over the past 2 days of discussions in terms of areas for concrete action. So the operational moments, the first is around scrutiny in licensing and contract negotiations, and the second is around strengthening anti-corruption elements in responsible sourcing and due diligence approaches that are used by traders and downstream companies. We know that these are particularly risky in the current environment with lots of very rapid, geopolitically linked deal-making competition happening, lots of money at stake. These are areas where we know we need to draw red lines around what is and isn't acceptable in terms of risks associated with corruption and conflict of interest. And these are also areas where platforms like EITI have a foothold. So there's something to build on, and I'm hopeful that as we start the process of refining the EITI standard to better address both energy transition and anti-corruption issues, that these are linkages that we can strengthen. Very quickly, the two accountability mechanisms that we've been discussing are, one, improving enforcement. So when corruption does happen, ensuring that it is met with real consequences and real accountability. And the second is strengthening transparency. Transparency around areas that we know are essential to identifying and rooting out corruption risks. So licensing, contracts, payments, beneficial ownership, trading, state-owned enterprises. In these areas, we need both formal and informal accountability tools, and we need stronger mandatory disclosure frameworks, not just voluntary efforts. But EITI still has an important role to play. Transparency is our bread and butter in EITI, and I think if we can do a better job at leveraging the tools we have here for anti-corruption efforts, that we have real opportunity to make progress on this. And again, I think the refinements process to the standard is going to be key.
Thank you so much, Erica, for bringing out very strongly the importance of accountability mechanisms and thinking about leveraging tools. Francis, I've got a follow-up for you. Based on the experience of Sierra Leone, what role is there for EITI's disclosure and dialogue requirements in helping overcome governance challenges in the mining sector?
Thank you very much, Mark. I wouldn't say that EITI is the panacea to all of the problems, but I believe that based on our experience, the EITI implementation could go a long way into addressing some of the issues. In the first place, EITI reporting allows EITI implementing countries to report on exploration, production, and the potential revenues that come out from exploration, but also for production. This would give the government a leeway to anticipate some of the income that is expected to come out of the extractive sector, and it could make them easy for them to project some of the revenues and how to address some of the obstacles to growth. The second thing I think where EITI would help is that making contract disclosures more mandatory and beneficial ownership transparency more mandatory. These two principles can help us mitigate corruption risks, which I highlighted and which Erica also highlighted during their presentation. Furthermore, the environmental disclosures that EITI has put in the standards can help in terms of remedying the impact of environmental degradation that is caused by the mining companies. And finally, the transparency related to state-owned enterprises that EITI requirements makes mandatory for EITI implementing countries can also help mitigate some of the thorny issues and tricky issues that we see on state-owned enterprises that are currently existing in EITI implementing countries. So I think with those examples, I think EITI can go a long way towards addressing some of the risks associated with the governance of the mineral sector. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Francis, and for highlighting what's already in the EITI standard that we can use as tools to help address some of the risks. And just pointing back to Erica's points earlier about what else do we need to do with the EITI standard going forward to bring us up to speed with some of the current realities around this subsector. Sampe, another question for you. How can the international community work together to strengthen governance in mineral supply chains?
Thank you. Yes, indeed. International communities have worked together. We do have regional and international bodies that have an important role to play in setting standards and encouraging collective action. So it's not only standard unanimously, but it has to be on collective base. Cooperation between countries, we believe it's very essential to finding solutions that allow us to strengthening energy security, like the other fellows say, while we remain committed to our decarbonization. Yes, indeed. Now, the G20, which has shown their strong commitment on this issue, 2022 is the Indonesian presidency. Under our President Joko Widodo, our tagline is recover together, recover stronger. What it means is that sustainable energy transition has to be done together. G20 has set up also working groups on the energy transition as well as anti-corruption. Under energy transition's pillar, we expect that global cleaner energy systems and just transition can be reached. I need to add more. We expect the responsibility and the role of global community to achieve a just energy transition. We understand that currently the global energy mix in all countries is still heavily dominated by fossil-based energy. It applies across the industrialized countries and also developing countries. A high demand for global mineral is expected in order to shifting to renewable energy. We encourage the global community, both the mineral producing countries and consuming or demanding industrial developed countries such as European Union, to discuss and set a good mining practices and standards that allow a just benefit to the producers and consumers as well. A responsible supply chain, we understand, has to be placed in the overall context, as I mentioned before, of a fair economic exchange price for raw materials, technology involved, financing, and environment externality cost. And as more and more governments now develop critical mineral strategies, like we hear lately, it is essential that close consideration is given to strengthening governance safeguards, promoting transparency, accountability, and constructive multi-stakeholder dialogues across mining value chains. Again, it is very important. And we do expect an equitable treatment resulting in a sustainable value chain of this industry. Hence, a due diligence, if I may say, and standard should apply not only to the mining and processing in extracting countries, because now it becomes global concerns, but also with respect to the downstreaming, manufacturing, marketing, and pricing of end product. In such a way, we will see and share the benefits of this mineral, of these critical minerals in all communities of the world. I think that's my point on that. Thank you.
Thanks for a very full response, Sampe. Turning back to Lawrence. Lawrence, what role is there for the private sector in ensuring that mineral supplies are both reliable and sustainable?
Well, thanks. So I think, first of all, one of the things we have to do is to commit to complying with the laws and regulations of the countries that we operate in. And that ensures that we have a strong license to operate, which then allows us to get product into the market in a sustainable and reliable way. Second, there's an internal also responsibility for us as mining companies to make sure that internally our own ethics and compliance structures and rules and regulations are strong and robust to ensure that we ward off against corruption and malpractices. And that means that, adhering by the ICMM mining principles and also making sure that we are in line with the commitments that we make within the EITI framework. There's also a responsibility for us to be more sustainable, and not just sustainable in the way that we mine, but also sustainable in the impact that we have on the countries that we mine in, to ensure that the benefits of resource exploitation do not just stay with the mining company or with government, but also have a positive impact on the population and broader society and become a catalyst for economic development. I think in that respect, meaningful and fair contributions to the countries in which we operate is absolutely critical. We have to make sure that communities not just benefit from the jobs that we provide, but also from the broader socioeconomic impact that our contribution to the fiscus can have in the countries where we operate. I think looking at our role within the EITI, we have an industry constituency, and we have to hold that industry constituency honest and accountable. And I see that as in my role as a board member of EITI as being paramount to ensure that we don't just, as Rio Tinto, adhere by the rules, but ensure that our peers and competitors who sit with us around the table are also held to the same standards to which we uphold ourselves. Thank you.
Many thanks for that, Lawrence, and particularly this emphasis on ensuring internal compliance and respect for best practices, but also best practices across the sector by those committed to achieving an honest and accountable sector. Erica, a follow-up question for you. Do you think current approaches are fit for purpose, or do we need new solutions?
Thanks, Mark. I mean, there are obviously a lot of mining supply chain frameworks that are very useful and important, and to some degree probably just need a level of harmonization and uptake to be improved. But it's clear that we have still very live governance problems in the mining sector. So obviously we haven't gotten it quite right yet. In keeping with the theme I talked about in the first round, corruption is an area where we see definite gaps. Right now, the incredibly important issues of environment and human rights concerns have taken a leading role in current critical mineral approaches. No question, these are key. And on these areas, we in fact need to see more mandatory due diligence and not just more and more kind of industry-led voluntary standards. But it would be an oversight to seek to address environment and human rights challenges in the sector without also at the same time tackling the systemic corruption problems that are so deeply entwined on these issues. So since we're lucky enough to be so kindly hosted by the European Commission, let me make a very direct plea. The EU urgently needs to strengthen links between policies on climate and corruption in order to demonstrate and deliver on its commitment to a just energy transition in the EU and globally. When you look at the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the lack of coverage of corruption issues is just glaring. There's an annex of kind of all of the relevant standards, and there's just this gap around all of the existing corruption standards that urgently needs to be addressed. The recently announced Repower EU plan that talks about the plan to end EU's dependence on Russian oil and gas also includes proposals on strengthening mutually beneficial, diversified supply chains of minerals, which is great. Those plans should also clearly address corruption risks, and the continued calls for acts of corruption to be added to the scope of EU global human rights sanctions needs to be addressed. The EU has been at the forefront of setting green growth and equitable climate policy, and I think if it wants to see that ambition through successfully in connection with critical minerals, frankly, on the fossil fuel side as well, then corruption can't be treated as a separate topic. We need to see the EU and other key global standard setters making corruption an integrated part of robust climate and energy security policy.
Thank you very much, Eric. And Antti, I'm sure you'll capture those remarks in your own closing remarks for this session. Now, we're at that stage where we're going to open up for questions, both from you here on the floor and also online. So please signal to me. I believe there's some roving microphones for those of you who are not seated near a microphone. Is that right? I can't see them, but let me see. Please raise your hand and introduce yourself and put your question. Please.
Hi, I'm Cielo Magno from the Philippines. Actually, my concern also is that I think when we talk about climate change, we should not just talk about the potential revenue and the governance issues and how countries will be able to maximize these minerals. I think it's also important to talk about how we can improve the environmental impact assessment, because sometimes we just do the standard EIA without emphasizing that these countries where the minerals belong are also vulnerable to climate change. And I think it's very important that when we do EIA, it should highlight that it should highlight how these activities will aggravate the already negative effects of climate change in these communities. And I think as an initiative, EITI, we currently have the disclosure already on EIA, but I think it's worth emphasizing that this disclosure should happen even before governments sign contracts with companies, so that communities will be fully informed on how these extractions will affect their communities, and that this EIA would specifically identify the effect of climate change in these activities. And a second point is that I'm a bit concerned when we talk about sustainable minerals or sustainable extracting of raw minerals to support the transition. I don't think there's a sustainable way of continuously extracting non-renewable resource. I think the only way for this to be sustainable and just is for us to realign our incentives and to look at new technologies, reduce the cost of technology and extracting the already extracted minerals. So we're talking about circular economy here. Maybe in the short term, we can extract minerals because the technology of a circular economy is still very expensive. But in the medium term and long term, I think that's the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Cielo. I'm actually going to ask Lawrence if you might address at least the first, if not both of those questions.
Thank you. So I think, I mean, on the first question, I totally agree with you. And this is why in my first intervention, I made the point that we should not just talk about the impact of the critical minerals on the on developed economies, but that we also need to be mindful of the impact that the extraction has on developing economies. There has to be an element of equity there. We will find ourselves in a situation where, again, the developing world essentially is going to provide the developed world with the means for it to solve its problems, which are today global problems. So there has to be that element of equity, and I think we really need to think about both. There's a net positive impact to be had from the extraction of critical minerals and their introduction into new technologies and into the technologies that will help us fight climate change necessarily for the developed economies, but we have to see what is the impact on the developing world. Now, in that regard, it's a shared responsibility. It's a shared responsibility from the mining companies to make sure that the contracts that we have with our host governments in developing countries are right, to ensure that the economic impact that we have is one that is positive, to ensure that we don't mine in a way that pollutes rivers, pollutes the environment, harms the livelihoods of populations. But there's also a responsibility on the host governments to ensure that the resources that they generate from resource extraction are used in an optimal and transparent way. And I think sometimes we run away from that debate and just look at one side of the coin. This is a partnership that we have, and we have to make sure, the resource curse issue is not just the responsibility of mining companies. It's also the responsibility of host governments who over time have not been able to use the resources that they've had from minerals extraction in a way that has been positive to their population. So that is, in my mind, absolutely critical.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. Let me see who else would like to come in. Please, all the way down here, right at the end.
Yes, hello, and thank you for inviting me here today. Rolf Kubi, Euromines, the European Mining and Minerals Association in Brussels. I wanted to encourage to demonstrate that the mining industry is part of the society. We usually always talk about the bad examples. We have a huge front-runner industry in mining where we can demonstrate that all of the critical issues linked to ESG, linked to the transformation, are dealt with in a lot of companies. And I would maybe ask the question, looking at all the standards and the best practices that are out there, can we see a development also together with the EITI, and maybe the OECD is the right platform to deal with this, to develop some kind of due diligence in mining and some kind of template where all of the standards that are discussed out there can be somehow certified. Because there's so much good happening and going on. Let's start to talk about the positive things. And I know we need to tackle the critical elements, but if we learn from the best practice examples and we find the right way to measure and compare the good, then we will have a chance to demonstrate that mining is really part of the society.
Thank you very much for your question. I know that Erica has been involved in these discussions with OECD and the EITI colleagues for the past couple of days. So Erica, over to you for this one, please.
Yeah, I think there's no question that, one of the very first things we embarked upon when we started this project was a mapping, right, of existing standards. So I think that's a really logical starting point, and it will help us identify where there are existing tools and where areas are that need to improve. So I think that's definitely part of it. In terms of, the due diligence standards, again, it's this hybrid mix, as Lawrence said, of kind of companies' own best practices and due diligence standards, as well as the actual regulatory policies that they have to comply with. So I think on both of those fronts, we need to have a lot more transparency about what's being done, about how we can be assured that policies are strong and that policies are being adhered to when those cases come across the table that are questionable. Because as much as, of course, every industry makes contributions, we have, again, very live cases of real problems. So I think, though, doing kind of analysis of things that go well and things that go wrong, and trying to increase the standards within companies' own policies, as well as the standards that they legally have to adhere to, are really key in making sure that they're, as much as possible, universal, so that we can raise the bar across the field.
Thank you very much. There was another hand in the middle over in the section over here, I think. I don't see it. I'll take the one right at the back this side, please.
Merci. Bonjour. Je suis Brice Makosso.
Thank you. Brice Makosso from Congo-Brazzaville. Two things worry me when we talk about reinforcing the EITI standard and disclosure. I would like to know if the panelists, and especially the companies could support environmental standards, especially the 6.1 requirement. Do they go to disclosure when it comes to sites that have been abandoned? How can we make this disposition more transparent in the management of funds in producing countries? Second element, we talked about the race, the minerals race. There is a risk that many companies would like to have access to pre-financing, to have access to minerals. And here I congratulate Erica, who was talking about corruption risks in this minerals race, because she also talked about these pre-financing approach. How could the European Union work on these corruption risks, especially when it comes to pre-financing?
Thank you, Brice. It sounds like another question for Lawrence, but I also might note for Auntie's closing remarks that he might consider the EU question. Lawrence.
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Je vais répondre en français.
Thank you very much for this question, and I would like to answer in French. So, two things. To answer your first question, we are open to have discussion on the strengthening of a framework that would bring about more transparency, because those are rather technical questions. But as far as my company is concerned, we are open, and anything that could help us strengthen transparency in the mining sector is positive. And of course, we are convinced that it is important to start a discussion with the various partners so that we can find a working framework that is fit for all. Environmental responsibility is of the essence today. With Rio Tinto, this is one of our strategic pillars. We would like to say that this year we dedicated $7.5 billion so that we are more neutral when it comes to carbon emissions. So, of course, this is a very important debate, and we are ready to have such a discussion with you and other partners. As far as your second question is concerned, I think that there is an elephant in the room, and you know that I will be very open, very straightforward, very honest. Here around the table, there are many state players, some mining companies' representatives, but today we are really missing Chinese mining companies. China is not represented here, and this is a growing player. So we need, I think, to have them around the table to have a discussion, because the practices differ between companies. We have companies like ours, they are listed, they have to follow some governance, but of course you have different practices with other companies that are maybe smaller, that do not necessarily have the same means than us, so that they can really stick to their responsibility. And then you also have companies coming from the other parts of the world, and they should be represented here. You are from Congo, Brazzaville. I think that nowadays in Africa, companies like ours are a minority.
Our two other speakers in a moment, so please consider for both Francis and Pakistan, over here first and then here.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Matoya Wolf. I'm the representative of EITI, the Spanish Agency for Development Cooperation, the office here in Brussels. So thank you very much for the very inspiring presentations by all of you, and really a lot of challenges ahead, but a lot has already been done. I have a question and a comment. A question on ILO Convention 169 on the prior consultation. So how are you dealing with it, with the prior consultation related to your work now, but also in the past? And my comment is on policy coherence for development. I think one of you has mentioned that related to the EU approach, EU and also member states, I assume. And I think we have to underline that policy coherence for development is an area where the EU is quite advanced compared to other regions in the world, and in particular to one elephant in the room that the previous speaker was mentioning. So just to have that in mind, policy coherence on development for development is on the European Consensus for Development that has been signed by all member states together with institutions. And of course, it's not everything is done, but we are on a good way ahead. Thank you.
Two of our panelists would like to address that question.
I can talk about that again. Look, I think FPIC is quite a complicated matter, and it's one that we are grappling with within the company. I don't have a response to that. I think we are. There is, okay. Let me maybe start differently. There is an acute awareness of the need for us to listen to the voices of all communities and to ensure that we have consensus in the way that we mine, but that we have a consensus to mine as a starting point. Reaching that consensus is quite a complex process, and at the moment, I don't think there is a consensus in the mining industry around the notion of FPIC. Within Rio Tinto, it's a debate that we're having. Where does it apply? How does it apply? Should it apply? Yes or no? How do we reach consensus? What does FPIC mean for some of the projects that we currently have? We have an issue in the US, for example, with our resolution project where we have 11 tribes. One of them opposes the project. The others don't. How do we reach that consensus? So I think we are in a position at the moment, or in a place where there's ongoing thinking about this issue. And we have to find a way to arrive at a solution that is satisfactory for all actors.
Thank you very much. And there's an additional question here in the front.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour.
Thank you very much. I am from Senegal, and I would like to say that we shouldn't only think about those minerals that will be used in energy transition, phosphates, for instance, to manufacture fertilizers in agriculture. So let's not forget in our orientation notes that we need to take into account those countries that have critical minerals. We could also speak of manganese, for instance. We shouldn't forget about alternatives, because there are alternatives, green hydrogen, for instance. Research should really go in this direction. So let's not only focus on those critical minerals whose reserves are not really guaranteed, especially if we think about this this rise of 2 degrees in temperature. So we should also think about alternatives, and this is what I was willing to share with you.
Take note of that and ask the panel to address it in a moment. I know I have a couple of questions from online participants that I'm going to throw in as well. The first, Joe, I think, is what concrete actions do you believe are necessary beyond the current political and policy discussions? Secondly, what other frameworks exist that could be complementary to the EITI in reducing governance and corruption risks along the critical minerals value chain? Francis, I'm going to turn to you to see which of those you'd like to pick up.
I will talk about what other critical frameworks exist beyond the current ones, which can complement the EITI. I believe there's a lot of synergy between the EITI standards and the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. You cannot talk about transparency and accountability without human rights. And I believe there's need for some kind of memorandum of understanding or some kind of getting together of these two implementers, transparency and accountability, and the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. I think if you try to look at these two principles and bring them together, it will go a long way in mitigating some of the issues that are coming out of the implementation of the EITI standards. That is the one I would talk about.
Thank you. And
thank you, Mark, and thanks also to our online participants for being so engaged. We also have, we don't have specific questions in the chat at the moment, but what we do have is Ian Mwinga and Fred Kabanda have raised their hands. Mark, I wonder if we want to see if Ian can unmute himself and ask his question.
Sure. So Ian Mwinga, could you unmute and pose your question, please?
Thank you very much, Mark. My question really is probably directed towards the EU colleagues, whether they've had a chance to look at price setting mechanisms. I know for a fact that that is going to be one of the critical issues for our green minerals, especially in implementing countries. And the question also is, based on your assessment, if you have done on price setting mechanisms, what are some of the options that governments can take in order to increase value and also share the risks and costs in this new space? I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take a second question from Fred Kabanda, who's also raised his hand. And then I'm going to turn to you, Baksampe, to pick up any of those questions you've heard before concluding with Antti. Thank you. Fred,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mark. Thank you very much, Mark. Mine is really a quick one. In order for us to be able to have a successful energy transition, two of the main factors will be price, affordability, but also analyzing the kind of emissions that will come with the processes of extracting these critical minerals. In other words, the transportation from where the raw materials are picked to where they are processed and used. And in the introductory remarks, there was a comment that the critical minerals list will keep changing. And my anticipation is that we will see it grow bigger and bigger. Now, the question is, what is EITI doing in this new space to help the countries where these raw materials are going to be extracted in order for them to be able to at least add value and reduce on the emissions, but also on the price and affordability of the final product, which is the renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Pak Sampe, did you have any? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think, especially with the last one and many other questions, I will give something like general comments. Yes, if we are talking about human rights, the first human right is a right to live. And then if we are talking about critical minerals, we have to think in two ways. We have one countries who have to explore many of the resources in order to live, but in order to become an end product, you have to have inside finance, technology, and market. In sense, the added value, that's the very last question, the added value of the technology, finance, and market, it's very difficult, cannot afford by many of the producing countries. So if we do agree that the critical minerals is the inheritance of the whole communities of the world in order to a better life in future, I really expect, because talking about the policy, that the policy be balanced, so the extracting, producing countries no need to explore as much as possible in order only to have a very small added value, because they have to pay a very high finance, technology, and market. But on the other hand, we do expect them to conserve the environment, human rights, and gender equality, etc. So in such a way, I do believe that this very respected forum can touch on that, to balance that, so the extracting countries and the producing countries and all the UX, especially a very high level of in developed countries, to help, so we can work together, recover stronger. That's my point, sir. Thank you.
I'm going to give the floor now to Jean-Jacques Kayembe for the final intervention here. You had your hand up, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I would like to come back on the EU and the panelists. In some countries like mine, RDC, there is a good exploitation of those minerals, but an artisanal way, small-scale mining. So I would like to know whether it would be possible to standardize or how we could understand how things are evolving in this sector. This is very important. So far, we have said that 20% of cobalt comes from the ASM sector. So I would like to know how you do react on this. How can you support us? This is a sector that is extremely important for us. Artisanal and small-scale mining. We know that we face many constraints as well. We face child labor as well in the mine. So this is a general question, but how do you think you could support us? How do you think you could help us work on those issues? Thank you very much.
A minute, and they can pick up your question too. And end up giving Auntie the floor for a couple of minutes to answer some of the points that have come up for him. So in quick succession, Lawrence, I'll start your end.
Thank you very much. Look, I think I just wanted to make a couple of points on the question of critical minerals, because I think, you know, there's sometimes a bit of need for clarity about what we're actually talking about today. Most critical minerals today are not being extracted in the developing world. We do not extract at this point any critical minerals in the developing world. We extract critical minerals from our mines in the US and from our mines in Australia. A lot of the critical minerals that we're currently extracting come from old mine tailings. And that is to the point about the circular economy. And we're finding through technology new means to extract these critical minerals, lithium from our borates site in California, thorium and rhenium from our site in Kennecott in Utah. Other critical minerals are coming out of Australian mines. In terms of new development, lithium is one of the critical minerals that we're currently looking to develop. The two projects we have, one of them is in Serbia, here on the footsteps of Europe, and the other one is in Argentina. A lot of the exploration is telling us that there are critical minerals all over the world. So I think we just have to understand first what we're actually talking about. That requires a complete paradigm shift in the way we look at mining, because it requires two things. One, an understanding that with the demand going forward, the circular economy is not going to be able to meet the demand for critical minerals. If everyone in Europe wants to drive an electric vehicle, it's not going to be possible through circular economy. We're going to have to find those minerals somewhere. Second, if every country that wants their citizens to drive EVs do not want to be reliant on a third country, that means that mining is going to have to start taking place here in Europe, in the US, and in other places. And that requires a significant paradigm shift about how we think about mining. It will also require developing countries to become much more competitive in terms of their investment environments, if they are to attract the investment from mining companies. Because the reality is, a lot of mining companies, at least the main ones, have moved away from the developing world. I think we're, together with Anglo-American, probably the only ones that are left and are still looking for stuff in the developing world. The rest are looking at other places in the world. And that tells me that there is an imbalance somewhere. We've got to make sure that the framework for mining provides for a conducive investment environment, but also make sure that in 10, 15 years, as I said, we're not here talking about a resource curse. Because in today's world where there are societal demands, societal expectations, I can tell you, the last thing that I want to do is to go to my investment committee with a project that looks like in 10, 15 years, someone's going to say, well, Rio Tinto has participated in the resource curse in this country. So I'd rather go and mine in Canada, where I'm sure that I have a certain framework and I have an environment that will ensure that there will be no resource curse in Canada. I think it's important. It was important for me to make those points because a lot of the time we talk about critical minerals as if they are like the minerals of old, that we only found in the development world, and that they will lead to this relationship that's been going on for decades of extraction in one part of the world and use in a different part of the world. It's going to be a different world going forward.
Thank you, Lawrence. Francis.
Thank you, Mark. I want to talk on two issues. The first one is environment. I believe that when we're talking about the environment, we only mention about the impact that it is causing on the environment. We do not talk about remedies. I believe some of the impact of these activities, there are remedies for it. And if we insist more on the remedies, I'm appealing to the EU, if you insist more on the remedies for those who have done the environmental damage to remedy some of the situation, I think that would go a long way towards mitigating some of the issues that we see. The second thing I want to talk about is the other players that Lawrence mentioned who have come into the fore. I believe that if we strengthen implementation of the EITI at the local level, at the country level, that can help bring these people to the fore rather than try to bring them at the global level. Because EITI implementation starts at the country level. So I believe if we reinforce EITI at the country level and bring them on board the EITI standards at the country level, that may translate and cascade into them coming on board at the global level. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. Erica.
Thanks. Just 2 points. I think on the artisanal and small-scale mining point, obviously there are some inherent differences between governance challenges of large-scale mining and ASM, but there are absolutely, there's a broader trend to formalize and regulate ASM. And I think in that process, there are definitely going to be standards and best practices that are cross-cutting across large-scale and artisanal and small-scale mining, and frankly, just best practices that are corporate but good practice regardless of the sector or the scale. So I think certainly the intention isn't to leave that out. I think the point that Lawrence raises around kind of the shift of mining companies, of electric vehicle battery manufacturers to prioritize governance considerations so extensively that they are actually moving their production lines to easier governance environments raises a really interesting set of challenges when you think of development considerations. In some respect, the kind of leave it in the ground conversation that we're having on the fossil fuel side, there's a similar conversation happening on the mining side around kind of leave it in the ground for governance reasons. And I think that brings us right back to the same place that we are on the oil side, which is around considerations of equity and compensation and just transition. So in a lot of ways, these sectors are intersecting around those just transition questions. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on that front.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So this is the final point, right? Thank you. So I think thank you very much again. Just to reiterate to what the opening being made by the EU, that according to our Sustainable Development Goals, we have 17, and the very first is no one left behind, and poverty alleviation is number 1. Number 13 is climate change. The thing that we are talking in these rooms relating to number 13. In the government, we have what we call something like trilemma energy, where the affordability, accessibility, and availability to all mineral resources has to be done in a responsible and sustainable manner. It can only be done by having cooperation and collaboration between developed countries and developing countries, so that we really expect that the raw materials that the producing countries have can be processed there to get the added value. So the community, the environment, the standard can be overseas there, can be seen there, and all the developed countries we expect coming there, and in such a way so that we will have a very best solution with respect to the governance and the economy and the very value of our critical minerals. Again, thank you very much for the very respected opportunities.
Thank you. And finally, Antti.
Well, thank you very much. And maybe I try to pick some of the issues that I heard in the very good discussion, which I think I'm very encouraged with. First, I think it's very easy to come after Sampe with his notion on SDGs. This is important work. I think it's great to see this kind of a sort of consensus around the table about the importance of sustainable practices, and also the acknowledgement that it's work in progress, and that if we are to achieve a green transition, if the EU is to achieve the Green Deal policy goals, we need to do better, and we need to keep on working on these issues, including in the EITI Board this week and beyond. Maybe picking up then on the corruption issue, this is of course important And I'm very happy to take that point from Lawrence that the EU should link, corruption risk more to our climate policy and our energy transition policies. At the same time, I'd like to say that we are paying a lot of attention to this aspect of good governance already. And I think also that our regulatory initiatives are going to the right helpful direction in this respect. However, I also think that it's not just a regulatory approach. We need instances like the EITI to push the envelope, to keep up the pressure and work together, public and private sector, on standards and improving those in the extractive sector. On the artisanal mining area, as referred to by our colleague from the DRC, I mean, this is very critical and is something where traditionally we have been very keen to support our partners. I think it's partly, as Laurent says, it's about regulation, it's about formalization indeed, but I think it's also about empowerment, and it's about engaging with the artisanal sector itself and the communities in which we have artisanal minings, so that they are enabled to also look into due diligence, better practice. I think our regulation, again, will help the supply chain. Due diligence will help on this, but it's only part of the question. I think we need accompanying measures at the local level to empower these communities and producers. I'd like to say that underpinning, of course, of all of this is an effective dialogue with civil society, a true multi-sector stakeholder dialogue. And that, of course, requires, democratic societies that enable and allow the civil society to play its role as checks and balances. And this is, of course, something that brings us to the human rights, as alluded to by Minister, which I think is hugely important and certainly something that the EU wants to keep at the very core of our political relations with our partner countries. So I'm very encouraged, and I think there's plenty of work to do. We're moving to the right direction in many ways, but we are not yet where we should be. We have less than 10 years to achieve the SDGs, and of course, this is a part of work that is definitely necessary in that respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vanti, for picking up all those comments peppered throughout our session today, and also to you and your colleagues in the Commission for co-hosting this event today with the EITI. Many thanks indeed. And of course to our 4 panelists for your excellent contributions today. So let's show our appreciation. Thank you.